If your warehouse runs on sticky notes, crossed fingers, and one person who just knows where stuff is, it's time for Endpoint. They connect your shop, stock, and shipments so you can stop playing hide and seek with inventory, and Gary can take some time off. Get real-time visibility and your sanity back at endpointas.com. And if you upgrade your warehouse before December 31st, you can take advantage of no payments for 90 days and 0% financing for up to 36 months. You may also be eligible to deduct up to 100% of your qualifying investment under Section 179. Consult your tax advisor to confirm eligibility. Terms and conditions apply. Learn more at endpointas.com. That's endpointas.com.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by two guests. I'm going to be joined by Chris Hamley, and he's the managing partner of Brecham Group. And I'm going to be joined by Pete Allen, New Warehouse alumni, but new to the Brecham Group. And we're going to talk a little bit about making your operations suck less. And we're going to hear what that's all about from Chris. I hear that's his motto for life, making it suck less. So we're going to hear a little bit about that and talk a little bit about operational turnarounds. And we're also going to dive into a little bit about what they're seeing in the warehouse operations landscape on all fronts, but particularly in automation too, as well, from our good friend Pete here. So gentlemen, welcome to the show. How are you both?
Doing well. Thanks for having us, Kevin.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Kevin. Good to see you again.
You too. Good to get you both on, and definitely very excited to dive into this discussion today. So let's kick things off here. Chris, why don't you start for us and give us kind of a brief overview of the Brecham Group, what it is you all do, and you started this thing. So tell us a little bit why you started it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, quick story. I spent my entire career in operations and engineering kind of roles across the industry, and came to a point where I started having a lot of really good conversations with people, but the problems were maybe not as complicated as we often thought they were. And what ended up happening is we talk around a lot of issues and not really understand what we were all talking about. And I found myself very often just translating conversations, right? What should we be talking about? And, what are the practical solutions to go address the problems we had? And I thought, at that point, I know a lot of people who have really good experience that have a very good problem solving ability to go attack those things. I said, let's go put that group together and figure out how to go do that. So that was the catalyst for the Brecham Group ultimately. And it came down to, well, things maybe aren't as complicated as we often make them. So let's just go figure out how to solve problems better.
Very interesting. And I'm curious, so you mentioned about the kind of the language that they're speaking, right? And I think you're referencing like operations maybe versus engineering or other departments. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I found myself a lot of times in like design sessions and stuff, right, with material handling professionals and really smart guys, the tech and everything that goes into building an operation really well. Talking to the operators who have a different vocabulary, and oddly enough, we use the same words, but we mean very different things most of the time. And I found myself like stopping conversation saying, wait, just so you understand, this is what they mean when they say that, right? Because coming out of operations and engineering, I'd been on both sides of that table and could translate ultimately. And, at the end of the day, we would find that they would use those words but mean those different things, and those were material differences in how people thought their operation was going to run.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really interesting to to point out, because there is kind of a disconnect probably from the people that are, doing the day to day and managing those operations to, those different parts of the organization that maybe don't understand exactly what happens in that warehouse. They just know the product goes in and the product comes out most of the time, right?
Right.
And so it's very interesting that approach and how that occurred to you. And now, so tell us about this kind of motto of yours, right? You make operations suck less. So tell us kind of where did that come from, and what does that mean to you?
Yeah. Well, it started off with a experience of me coming into an organization and having the ability to kind of just watch what the organization did for the first few days I was there. And I sat in meetings, and, we had this situation where we were underperforming as an operation, and my entire leadership team was stuck in meetings all day, basically explaining what the issues were from the week before, the month before, and not really ever spending time fixing the problems, right? Or going out and addressing, because they were basically getting beaten down every day, right? With having to just answer those questions. And after a couple of days, I pulled the team together and I said, boy, this really looks like it sucks, actually. So, here's what I'm going to do, is that I will take on the responsibility of answering all those questions. So I don't want you guys to do this process anymore. I'll take it. But I need everyone to go out and figure just one thing that they can go do this afternoon to make tomorrow suck less. Right. So what can you go do to drive improvements in your operations? And I need you to write that down and give it to me. So every day I'm going to ask you for that one thing you're going to do overnight or for tomorrow that's going to make it suck less. And that just kind of caught on. So that became our mantra of suck less. And it's really just about continuous improvement. It's about, how do I take action immediately to go make things a little bit better? And while most of those things are not kind of earth shattering, transformational ideas, you do get significantly better over time just by chasing kind of the easy things you can go control.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a simple way to put it, right? But one that like resonates, right? And registers with people to, how can they improve their day to day, right? And just make it better. And you mentioned something, interesting there, where you get kind of bogged down in these meetings, right? Just answering questions. And so tell us, like, I mean, in your minds, right, having the experience that you have, what should an operations leader's day look like? I mean, it shouldn't be bogged down with meetings, right? Right? But I think going back to the language barrier there a little bit, like there's maybe a misconception on that from other areas of the business. So tell us, in your view, like what should that day look like?
Yeah. Funny you ask. We actually get this question a ton. And personally, I think that 75 to 80% of the leader's day needs to be leading people. And that is out engaging with people, removing barriers for them, and really enabling their workforce, whatever that looks like, whatever their group looks like, enabling them to go do their jobs. Unfortunately, we rarely see that being the case, because we get stuck in meetings. We have to justify performance. We have to talk about what the next great thing is, whatever those meetings are that drive us away. But sometimes we lose sight of, we call them people leaders for a reason. They need to be out leading people, and unfortunately we see that transforming in organizations, where when we don't spend enough quality time with the people doing the job, we very often start losing performance. We start getting worse, which just means we now have more meetings to justify what we're doing.
Yeah. It's like a whole cycle, basically, right?
Self-fulfilling prophecy, yes.
Yeah. So Pete, I got to ask you. You recently joined Brecham Group, right? So what do you think about this?
Right.
The motto of suck less. What do you think about that? What are your thoughts?
I laughed the first time I heard it, but it resonates more and more for me because of the time I've spent with Chris and his team. And I think what's interesting about Brecham, and one of the reasons I joined, is, they're a different type of supply chain consulting company. They have a large staff of consultants, 150 plus, that are like 27-year tenured DC operators, supply chain leaders, transportation leaders. Like, they have all the disciplines covered, but they come from an operational perspective. They're not coming out of Harvard with an MBA, some big firm in supply chain. And interesting enough, some of the largest supply chain consulting firms actually subcontract Brecham to do work for them. So I find that really interesting that this operator background can really have a material impact on leadership training, providing different resources, assessment of an entire operation to figure out, hey, where are the real challenges and what's the quickest way to materially impact the operations and drive real value and change what's going on when something might be challenged.
Interesting. Yeah. And I love that you you point out that operational kind of experience, the real world experience, so we'll say on the floor and actually leading these operations as such a value driver there. And it reminds me of I had an old boss who had moved on to a new job, and I went to just go visit him one time and check out his new operation he was working in, and he goes, yeah, they got these consultants they hired here, and yeah, this kid he's like 24, he's got a MBA from Harvard and all that stuff, but he doesn't know shit. So I mean it's very interesting there, and I think that operational experience is such a value driver and such a differentiator too, to be able to work on these projects. And going back to, I mean, that kind of language barrier, right? Is like just understanding and living it for some time can change your perspective on the way you go about things like that. So now, Chris, you guys focus a lot on kind of DC turnarounds, right? And trying to right the ship in a sense, right? Where, something has gone wrong, whether it's performance or it's just not getting, the productivity or throughput that needs to be there for these operations. So share with us a little bit, what leads to kind of these DCs getting into this bad state, right? Like, how do they end up needing to be turned around, and what are some of the factors that you often see there?
Yeah, there are a handful of things, right? They're kind of common denominators that we find, right? One of them is really maybe over-indexing on something versus something else. So take we over-index on service, which means all of our efforts, all of our KPIs are geared around the service component. And unfortunately, for us to be successful in supply chain operations, really have to be good at service, first of all, right? But also from a people perspective, we have to be mindful of the culture, the environment, safety, those kind of things from the people side, but also cost effective as well. So we have to have kind of all three of those pillars working in conjunction, and we have to deliver against all of them. And we over-index on one, it means we're under-indexing on the other two, and ultimately something breaks. We can chase service, but if we're not paying attention to our people, all of a sudden the culture that we create starts degrading performance. And when we start having degraded performance, it means we're not servicing our customers well. So it breaks at some point if we don't pay attention to all three. That's one. Another element of it, though, is often just, we mentioned about getting stuck in meetings and not paying attention to what's going on the floor. One of the things we talk about is details matter. Somebody has to be out paying attention to the details of the operation kind of throughout the day. And when we're not doing those things, it falls apart pretty quickly, actually.
Yeah, very interesting. And I love the focus on the people, right? And not giving them kind of the attention, I guess, that they deserve out there on the floor, and how that leads to other things kind of falling apart, right? And it's very interesting to see that, like you said, you put all the focus on service, right? And then all of a sudden all the other aspects start to fall apart, and then all of a sudden, like, it's like, well, we did so well on service, but then like all these other things are bad, right? Like the safety is bad, the culture is bad, the turnover is high, like all these things, right? How do you rein that in and get that balance to make a smooth running operation? So tell us a little bit about, I guess, don't give away kind of your secrets or anything like that, but tell us a little bit about, you go into one of these DCs and it's in disarray or whatever, it's not working properly, needs to be turned around. I mean, what is like the first thing you kind of look at, or the first thing you try and attack? What's the priority there?
Yeah, sometimes it depends on the degree of disarray that we're talking about, right? We'll go into triage environments at times where we are just not shipping what we should ship every day. That's a slightly different animal, and my standard joke is the number one thing we tell people in that environment is stop. Just stop doing whatever the bad things are that you're doing now. And honestly, we spend the first few days just doing that, of cleaning up processes and stopping bad behavior. And when it's more of a cost transformation or a service transformation where there's the building's operating and doing reasonably well, but not hitting the metrics we would hope for. In that environment, it starts usually with some level of accountability. It's how do we teach that the entire organization and every level in the organization has some accountability and expectation of what they go do every day. And what we have to do is, first of all, teach them what their job is. Then how do we measure those things? How do we know if they're doing their job? How do we validate that they're doing their job? Right. And then ultimately, how do we have conversations about how do we get better at it? Going back to the suck less idea. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really interesting. So, I mean, this triage state, it would be interesting to hear. I mean, like what do you consider, like, because it sounds like you have a scale almost of disarray there in what you said, right? So, I mean, when do you consider that an operation is like at a point where they need I guess maybe on the lowest point of the scale, like where are they at in that, where something's going wrong, but maybe it's not extreme yet at that triage level and they need help with getting things back in order?
Triage usually happens around service issues.
Okay.
So again, fundamentally, we're a service organization, right? All supply chains are. We're delivering product to a customer. And when we start seeing failures, we're not shipping everything we're supposed to ship every day, we're missing SLAs, those kind of factors usually turn it into a triage. There isn't time to figure out the right answer and put together a roadmap of what to go improve. Like there often is, like from a cost structure perspective, it is how do you write the ship in the next 2 weeks so that we can start servicing our customer again. And so service is usually the indicator. When we're called in to help on a service issue, that those become more triage efforts.
Gotcha. And what do you see in terms of like if somebody's listening to this and they feel like their operations maybe are, going down the wrong path in a way, right? What are some of the signs or the indicators that you might see like prior to getting to that triage level, like to maybe try and prevent a little bit?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Today's episode is brought to you by the Brecham Group, a supply chain consulting firm built by operators and engineers, not just advisors. Their experienced team helps companies bridge the gap between strategy and execution inside distribution centers using a proven framework called Precision Supply Chain Operations. The result? Faster performance, greater efficiency, and real ROI. If you need speed, precision, and measurable results, visit brechamgroup.com.
Yeah. I always talk to people about, from a senior leadership perspective, I'd ask a couple of questions of your ops team, right? It's things like, why is your performance degrading? And if the number one reason is that the people aren't just working as hard as they used to, right? Some kind of ambiguous answer like that's usually a pretty good sign that we're losing culture, we're losing a focus on the day-to-day operations. Another thing, honestly, just as one of my standard lines is I've never walked through a well-run operation that didn't look like it was a well-run operation. So things like housekeeping, how well do we pay attention to details? What's the pallet look like in the rack? Those kind of things matter ultimately because that indicates we're paying attention to levels of detail. If it's a mess and we haven't taught people how to throw trash away or clean up after themselves, how are we teaching them to do the harder things like pick orders and ship things on time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great point, right? I mean, I love a clean warehouse, I'll say. I'm very, very passionate about clean warehouse, but, I think that is such an indicator of so much more than it's just clean in here, right? I mean, like you said, it's attention to detail, it's, organization, it's, people caring to be able to do that and leadership, pushing that through the culture as well to do that. Yeah.
I love going through on tours with with building leaders as well. And I'm always looking for, is the employee base willing to come talk to the person who's giving me the tour? Right. Because if they're willing to come up and have a conversation, knowing that there's somebody different standing next to them, that's an excellent sign that the culture is very positive, that people are empowered, people are engaged in what's going on. When we walk through a building and nobody talks to anybody, that's usually a red flag for me too.
Interesting. Yeah. And Pete, what do you think about that?
No, I think that's totally right. And I think one of the things that I've learned since being here at Brecham, I actually went to one of the sites and watched some of the team actually doing training and coaching, and it was really exciting. But one of the things they were looking at was, indirect labor, and how big of a percentage of that is the total labor time. And if indirect is, somewhere north of 20%, that's an indicator that there's a problem and that the performance isn't where it needs to get to. And if you can drive out some of that indirect labor cost, you get pretty significant value return. Mm-hmm. Right. But this goes back to some of the discipline and the training that Brecham provides. So I think that was really insightful for me to get a better understanding of, and one of the things I've learned since I've been here.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think it's so interesting, those little nuances almost that you can pick up that can be telling of so much more of the bigger picture in the sense. So I guess, Chris, I'm curious, for like an ops manager, right, when they go and walk around their facility, what tip would you give them to like put a different eye on things, to think in that way that you're talking about?
One of the things we always coach people on is just the idea of, pay attention to your surroundings, right? Mm-hmm. When leaders walk through an operation, typically they're usually out to solve a problem. They're in transit to go do something, right?
On a mission, yeah.
On a mission, right? I'm going out to solve this problem. I have to go talk to that person, whatever that might be. And what I would encourage people to do is simply just pay attention to what's actually happening around you, right? Watch what people are doing. Watch how many people are engaged in work, those kind of things. And really just kind of get a sense of how the operation's running, not just go solve your problem. Because when you pay attention and see those things, you start to understand what's really happening.
Absolutely. And I love that. I liken it to, you guys watch basketball at all?
Absolutely.
Like court vision, right? You gotta have like the warehouse vision, right? You gotta know like what's going to happen next and what's happening over here, while still paying attention to, dribbling that ball and getting to that mission, right? So very interesting there. And so now, Pete, I'll give you this question first, right? Because you see, in your experiences, a couple different sides of the industry, I think, right? So if we look at the industry right now, operations specifically, I mean, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges that they're facing today?
I mean, the obvious ones are labor shortages, right? Keeping throughput up, keeping the building running on a regular cadence and getting the product out the door. My background is mostly in robotic automation.
Sure.
I geek out about it, right? But I have engaged with a lot of supply chain consulting companies on this topic. And I find it really refreshing in talking to Chris and his team about the approach. And I met Chris 4 years ago when I was at Berkshire Gray. We continued, having conversations when I was at Agility. And I think it's interesting to find out that, as you're in the automation side and you're trying to sell a solution to a large corporation, let's say, and, unbeknownst to you, there's a consultant behind the scenes who's analyzing your design and figuring out, is this company even ready for automation, right? So that was kind of eye-opening to me when I first met Chris, to hear that went on. I certainly know that that's a thing now,
sure,
after being in the industry for long enough. But I think the approach is interesting that Chris and Brecham take to automation, which is one of the challenges. Like, I think a lot of companies are looking at automation now, right? We're seeing more of its scale. We're seeing AMRs become, highly scalable. We're seeing ASRSs become scalable, in many different operations, and people are immediately looking at going, oh my God, it's working over there and the ROIs look great. Let's go do it ourselves. And then they put it in and magic didn't happen. They're not getting the same ROI. Their throughput is below where they expected it to be. And I give credit to the robotics companies. They probably designed it right. The machines probably work right, but there's something else wrong. So Chris's team, I think, does a great job of helping companies assess, are they ready for automation? They may want it, but are they ready? Are they capable? Do they have the right processes? Do they have the right disciplines to actually engage with it, which will ultimately help with the labor problem, the throughput problem, and everything else if they do it right. The last thing you want is to implement an ASRS and all kinds of robotic automation and it not work, right? You'd rather get it right up front. So maybe, Chris, you could expand on that a little bit and from your perspective.
If we have a solution in place right now in a distribution center and we're achieving, 50, 60% of what the potential is in that building, by putting a new tool in, we're not magically going to get better as operators. We may increase our overall throughput or cost efficiency or whatever that is, but at the end of the day, we're not going to fully utilize that tool. And to do that, we have to go back to paying attention to the details, right? We need to be analytically driven. We need to understand how things work and manage to those things. And until we're ready to do that, you won't actually achieve the full automation benefit typically. Yeah, to Pete's point, automation generally works. That's not 100% true, but generally it works exactly the way it was designed. And we find that particularly on the back end of that, when automation projects fail, it's generally related to we're not paying attention to the details we should be, or we're not operating it in the manner it was designed, right? And again, it comes back to that attention to detail. How well are we managing our business ultimately?
Yeah, very, very interesting there. And I think that's such a great point that you both have is that, even though automation, I think there's some perception, right, from marketing aspects and just, general discussion that, oh yeah, automation, robotics will make it better, right? Make everything better, right? But if it's not good to begin with, it's not just gonna be like your Band-Aid, right? To be the automatic fix, right? And I'm curious, Chris, from your perspective, because you talked a lot in the beginning of the conversation about the people, right, and the core of the operation, and whether the people are dissatisfied, and that's why productivity is slipping, and things like that. I mean, how do you advise and consult on finding that balance as people are looking at these automation solutions, like finding that balance between the right mix of people, labor, right, and then automated solutions as well?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple things to consider. The first one is just the consistency of business or the process we're using, right? If we have a highly volatile environment, so the order profile changes a lot, as those things start to happen, those processes may not be consistent or mature, one of the two, and consequently, it's difficult to automate. If I put an automation solution in a process that varies a great deal, I over-design the solution or never quite meet the requirements ultimately. So we look for stability of a process, how consistent is the workflow, what's the future likelihood that the business is going to change and therefore change that process as well. Take order characteristics as a great example. If we've historically been a retail business and we're moving into more e-com, building an automation solution for the retail solution is problematic, right?
Right.
I think the other thing that goes along with that, though, is understanding the volatility of kind of the peak to average. Going back to the old proverbial, are you building the church for Easter or not? And how best to leverage people versus automation in those, and getting the right balance. And there are a lot of factors that go in: ability to hire, wage rates, all those kind of things too. But ultimately, understanding that balance.
Interesting. Pete, you have any thoughts on that? The kind of finding that balance between the human workers and then the automation within an operation.
Yeah, I mean, again, I take it from the lens of coming from the robotics side, right? In that there are a lot of dangerous jobs in these warehouses that are mundane, they're repetitive, they're heavy lifting, people can get injured. And that's generally where you find the highest turnover, right? And having to replace people is costly. Keeping them in the job is hard to do. Injuries happen. So those are the places I look for first to try to automate, because they're more likely to be adopted and more likely to have success and not impact your labor shortage. Well, impact your labor shortage problems, but not have an impact on the labor force that's there.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point, right? Not to have that impact. I mean, I remember I was in an operation and and we were just playing around. Like we had very simple automation, like just a small conveyor in the shipping area, and that was about it. And we were just playing around with this idea of using an AMR to pull around some carts in the manufacturing area, and we didn't we didn't tell anybody about it because I guess we didn't think about that. And we brought in just like a demo unit and was playing around with it on the floor. And within like 10 minutes, forklift operator had been with the company probably close to 10 years, like pulls up and he's just like, "Oh, you're bringing that thing in to take my job, huh?" I'm like, oh, maybe we should have communicated this or talked about this, right? I mean, I think there is like that very interesting dynamic, right, of how, is the people reaction going to be, right? And how do you navigate that too as well? So very interesting there. So now,
Yeah,
sure.
on that front, I would just chime in a little bit and say, I think, change management and a communication plan should be at the top of the list of anytime you're going to bring in some type of automation to an organization. And just coming from the humanoid world, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole different animal, right?
That's a big change.
And if you haven't had talks with your associates and team, you're going to have problems like you experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. So now, I guess speaking of humanoids, right? If we look towards like the future of operations and kind of what you guys are seeing, I mean, Chris, what do you view as kind of the future look of operations and maybe something that people should be looking out for?
Yeah, I think as we look at like humanoid robotics, right? It's a great example. I think it's coming, right? I think at some point in time, maybe not today, but in the near future, I think it'll start replacing people. And I think as we get more and more sophisticated with technology and automation, we will see more, not just greenfield operations startup that are fully automated, but being able to transition into more brownfield operations, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the huge win around humanoids, for instance, is that, if I could put somebody in an environment that I currently have a person in, that's kind of a good state, right? But with that, operationally, we have to also start thinking about the skills we need to run those buildings, both from a leadership perspective and analytics perspective, have to evolve as well, because we can't just hope that everybody knows what the right things to do are. We have to have the systems and the knowledge and direct things to go do all those things, which means we have to elevate kind of our thought process around those things also.
Interesting. And Pete, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I would just elaborate on that even further. I think, that could lead to higher paying jobs, different skill sets, right? Different opportunities for associates that are currently there that now are, managing the operation of an automated ASRS. Like, that's a pretty cool job compared to pulling, boxes off an AMR, those kind of things, right? I think those are exciting opportunities for people within the organization, especially tenured ones who have been valuable employees that you want to keep in the organization, and you can train them up. And I think, as far as the future goes too, related to automation, I think companies need to kind of evaluate how they evolve in that, right? To Chris's point, you're probably not going greenfield, fully automated off the bat, unless you're this major corporation with millions of dollars, and that's a thing that can be done. But more likely, you're going for point solutions in brownfield operations. And whether it's humanoids or mixed case palletizing, depalletizing, there are plenty of point solutions out there that could be the right fit for your organization. And supply chain consultants can help with that. The people designing it can help with it. But one of the things we ran into, interesting, and I wanted to get this in here. We actually talked to a different technology company, a robotics automation company, very big one the other day. And I loved their perspective. It was, hey, you know what? We actually do engage with supply chain consultants before we do big projects because we want to get it right. And I think that was a great comment because I don't think everyone in the automation space has that same mindset. Like a lot of, automation companies are all based on growth and valuation, and, they want to sell as many as they can.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes they don't get it right. But this was a company that was generally looking out for their customers, more so because they didn't want to put it in and have it not work, right? And then have all kinds of problems. But that perspective was great. And I wish more companies would share that.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's fantastic too, because, I mean, like you said, unfortunately, there's, some companies out there and they have, massive sales teams and, they want to sell, like you said, and they want to close deals.
It's their job.
And that's the thing,
Yeah.
right? But if it's not right, then in the long term, I mean, how is that going to impact the reputation, right? And does that make them a winner over the long term? So I love that, definitely. But a very insightful conversation with you both today, and definitely some interesting things there. And I think the proper way to close out this conversation, Chris likes to make things suck less day by day, one thing per day, right? I think you said so. So why don't you leave us here at the end of the conversation with like one thing that the majority of operations managers could do to make their operation suck less tomorrow?
The thing is, actually, this is it, is that go do something, right? We talk about it in terms of like, have a bias for action, right? So people too often kind of get sucked in the idea of talking about what they can go do, and they look for these right answers. But going back to the suck less comment of just pick something, go do something this afternoon that's going to change tomorrow. Doesn't have to be big, doesn't have to be anything sexy. It's just simply just go do something, right?
Perfect. I love that. Definitely. All right. Well, a pleasure to get you both on the podcast here and talk about these topics. Now, if people are feeling like they might be on the verge of triage and they need to talk to you guys, what's the best way to get in touch or learn more about the Brecham Group?
Yeah, feel free to hit our website, brechamgroup.com, or reach out through Pete. Pete, if you want to share information, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, no, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm out there, Pete Allen, very easy to find. Just Google me, and I'm happy to take any messages through that. You can also reach me at peteallen@brechamgroup.com, and I will respond to any email within 24 hours, and we'd be happy to talk to you and figure out how we can assist your efforts.
All right, fantastic. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well as in the show notes. So Chris and Pete, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Enjoyed this episode? Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, and for more content from the New Warehouse, find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Links to subscribe can be found in the show notes, and for everything The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com.